Hi and welcome to part 2 of our Australia trip. I think it's part 3, Selena says it's part 2 because in between Brisbane and Sydney, which is the video we're doing now, we actually went to Melbourne and you went to Canberra as well.
So we did. So yeah, technically it's the third part of our trip to Australia.
So for anyone that hasn't watched the first video, go back and watch our Brisbane video, which I thought was quite interesting watching it and editing it back because we hadn't been there before. So it was quite nice to review what we actually did.
And also see somewhere else different in Australia that we didn't get to experience last time.
This video, however, is going to be about Sydney, which is the place that we visited for one day, and I concluded that Melbourne was better. This was 1 year ago, and we had a lot of people telling us, no, Sydney's the best, no, Melbourne's the best, but now we've spent 7 or 8 days?
About a week. And now I loved Sydney last year. We spent that one night and I just fell in love with the place immediately, but agreed with all the comments that we weren't there long enough to really know how much we really like Sydney.
We actually arrived in Sydney from Melbourne, for me, and you arrived in Sydney from Canberra.
Yeah.
And we were really fortunate because the flights got in within 10 minutes of each other.
Yeah, and it was really easy. He was at the opposite terminal, so I dragged my bags and met Ant, which was super easy.
Then we had a hire car. Is that how we got there?
Ant's memory of this entire Australia trip, if you've not watched the last video, you know he does not remember much.
I don't know whether it's age or jet lag.
But we hired a car just because getting an Uber was way more expensive, and we were actually going to stay in a place called North Ryde for the first 3 nights of our stay in Sydney.
North Ryde is a very interesting place. And I guess like all cities, it's lots of different things. I didn't look up anything about North Ryde. I assumed in my head Sydney was all quite similar. What I would say is the drive into North Ryde was really pretty. The rolling hills, the dense greenery, it's beautiful. This
is what got me last time. Immediately as I landed in Sydney last year and the same this year, I just love the scenery of Sydney. It's very pretty, it's very scenic, the water as well. North Ryde. So you're probably wondering, why was we there in North Ryde? I was there for work. And what's very evident about North Ryde is that there are just loads of med tech, pharma, businesses, huge companies that have all congregated in this one location of North Ryde.
It's a massive business park, which was very surprising because when you're a person like me and I've arrived there, Selena's at work. So in the day, I'm just walking around what is effectively a business park.
There's a university there as well. And what was interesting, I'd asked some colleagues, oh, is there anything to do around there? And like, there's a big shopping centre.
Where we stayed was opposite. You could walk from our apartment hotel to the shopping centre in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And really that was walking through the car park. It was opposite. Very impressive shopping centre if you're into that, but that's not really my style. So I think we went there to eat once or twice. On our arrival, Selena, I don't know whether you picked it or your work had picked the place to stay, the accommodation.
They had made a recommendation of a couple of places and we picked that one.
It was really nice, and for those of you who should have now watched our previous video, we tend to prefer to stay in apartments over hotels generally, and this was an apartment hotel, so it was run like a hotel, but they were kind of small suite
and they're
apartments.
Quite popular. So it was the Meriton Suites. From what I could tell, they have a lot of them in Sydney. I think they probably have them in Melbourne, but certainly in Brisbane we had the chance to stay.
Yeah.
So very like a collection of hotels across that east coast, perhaps. I'm not entirely sure. And actually, I think of all the places we stayed, it was the best apartment.
Yeah, definitely. But in terms of North Ryde, I did try and go for a walk. I went for 2 walks and realised there really wasn't anywhere walkable there. I then one day jumped in the car and drove around. Very pretty to look at, but not really somewhere where you can go. So it's kind of stuck
you have to go away from that area to find anywhere nice.
Yeah, that's how I felt. And if people are from there, let us know. But I couldn't really find somewhere to kind of just be and hang out. I went and sat in a cafe for a few hours one day, but they were all business people. So I'm sitting in the middle of conversations where he was talking about how much oil and seed he'd sold. It's a very odd place. Yeah. So there wasn't much to do. I had a much better time when I jumped in the car and drove, I think, 30 minutes across town, and I ended up by the coastline. That was really nice, but again, that's not North Ryde. So not really much to say on North Ryde other than if you have business there, I guess it's great.
But we did have some really good Korean barbecue there at the shopping centre.
Yes.
It was genuinely, it's an all-you-can-eat Korean barbecue, super popular. We didn't know, I think you just randomly found it on Google. We got there and it was super busy on a Sunday afternoon.
And we ended up meeting a guy that was staring at me for ages. The whole time, there was like half an hour where this guy just kept watching me, and I knew he wanted to strike up a conversation. And we ended up being next to him on our tables. And in the end, had a really good conversation with him because he's born and bred in Sydney, Italian heritage.
Yeah.
And we just spoke to him about what it's like here, what he believes in terms of Melbourne versus Sydney. Can you remember what he said?
I think, unlike our channel where people were very polarised in their views, he was quite balanced. Actually, no, that's not fair. A lot of people comment on our videos and like, oh no, there's charm to both, they're balanced. And he was very balanced. What he did say is, in his opinion, Sydney isn't what it used to be and it's gone downhill. But I would say most people seem to say that about their city or town, that they don't feel it's as good as it used to be.
Yeah, in the last 10 years, that's a very common thing, regardless, including where we live in Las Vegas. If you meet people that have been here for 20, 30 years, they say exactly word for word the same thing. It's not what it used to be. I think that just happens with immigration, population growth. He didn't seem to talk badly about either. He just said he thinks that Melbourne has a little bit more of an edge to it now.
Yeah, and
Sydney.
the food, I think, and everyone agrees this, there's no competition when it comes to food and Melbourne.
Anyway, that's enough about North Ryde. That's how I feel about that place. Moving on to the real part of the trip, which is Sydney proper, the bit that people know, which is Sydney Harbour Bridge,
the Opera House, and that's actually where we decided to stay for this trip, because last time we picked one night, we was there for one night and we decided to stay in Bondi Beach.
We had some fun getting there though. So Selena mentioned we had a car. I kind of had this feeling that we might have to do a lot of lugging of our luggage. I hope it's not up these hills, because most coastal places, at least the ones I've been to, they're not particularly flat. And in my head, even though I didn't know exactly where we were going, I haven't got a feeling we're gonna have to pull things up a hill.
Because we realised we wouldn't need the car for that part of the trip, so we dropped the car off in the city centre, and with that we had 2 pieces of large luggage, hand luggage, and then we had to go from there to the hotel, which was only 10 minutes maximum away walking, which we thought, Then Ant said, unless there's hills and steps.
And when she says 2 pieces of luggage, hand luggage, no, we had 2 25-ish kilo plus 2 of the wheelers plus 2 10-kilo backpacks. You're way underplaying it. So when we parked,
hand luggage, and I said hand luggage.
Like you said, it would normally be a 10-minute walk, but it was a 10-minute walk of a constant gradient. Sometimes you had to be in the road, then I had to carry them up the stairs. And we arrived at the Shangri-La, which is a nice hotel, completely sweaty.
So this is the thing with the Shangri-La, it is at the top of this hill. So it's in a great area right by the Harbour Bridge, in the rock. So great walking distance to all the places you want to be, but it's at the top of the hill. So you can't really avoid going up there. But it was, and it's very steep, and Ant did a good job carrying the big boy luggage.
So we are not normally that fancy. No. We would not normally stay in the Shangri-La or any of those high-level ones just because I can't bring myself to pay the hundreds of dollars a night. However, we mentioned in our Dubrovnik video that we've started to use the Amex features and perks a lot more. And on the Amex website, if you're using the card, they had it at quite a reduced rate. So I think it was $230 a night, which is very good for that type of hotel. Plus you get $100 US dollars credit towards your stay that you can use in the hotel. We had credit
off towards the hotel stay as well.
We opted, I think originally we were going to stay there for how long?
2 nights only. It was only ever 2 nights.
It was only 2 nights. 2 nights in the Shangri-La. So with all of those benefits, it probably came out to about $150 US dollars a night, if that, which is the only reason we would have stayed there.
What's really nice about the Amex perks and why it works out really well, not just in the cost overall, it's you get to check in from midday and you get to check out as late as 4 p.m. So it works out really well, and we'll explain a little bit more because we ended up having to extend our stay, which we'll come to in a moment. But the Shangri-La, we've never stayed at, like we said, we've never stayed typically at hotels like that. The service was really good, the front desks were really helpful, to the point that if you're walking through and you seem a little bit lost, they immediately come up to you and say, do you know where you're going? Do you need directions? We was upgraded to a much higher floor. I think we was on the 22nd or 25th, I can't remember. So that was a really nice perk. So when we entered the room, immediately, it's a huge room, first of all, which is, I think is quite rare when you stay in the city centre, which was partly the reason why we picked Shangri-La, was because of the square footage of the room. But with it being so high, we had these amazing views over Sydney. And it was a very nice room, very traditional, I would say. I would say kind of old style, the golds,
Definitely
the
the stuff you
browns.
see in the movies. Think of Home Alone.
It's very much Home Alone, very opulent.
Yeah, but 80s, 90s opulence.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Large bed, but it was a very well serviced room. It had all these great amenities in there. And one of the favourite things for me was the ledge that it had against the windows. So you could literally just sit on this ledge and enjoy the views of the harbour.
The downside, the only downside really at the Shangri-La, because it depends on what types of rooms you like, was they had a very good gym in terms of equipment, but I've never been to a dirtier gym.
And yeah, we saw some reviews online where people complained about the gym, and we thought, oh, what are they complaining about? This is a great gym. But then when you get up close, you can see that they've literally never cleaned the equipment. It was so disgusting. The other aspects of it were great in terms of, like I said, the service. With Amex, you get breakfast covered for both of us. The breakfast service was a little bit chaotic, I would say super busy, but it had great views over the harbour, but still a very good breakfast in terms of the selection.
They struggled with the amount of people, and I don't know if that's normal or not. Were we there on the weekend?
So, and actually this is a really good point, and we might as well just speak about it now. So we was in Sydney at the same time that the cyclone was happening in Brisbane, and this ended up extending our stay in Sydney, and because of the cyclone, lots of people got caught out with the cruise ships and their flights. So there were people like us that were supposed to go to Brisbane that couldn't go, and a lot of the cruise ship people that also had to stay longer in Sydney because of the cyclone. So I think it was partly due to that. One thing we did do that we have, and probably was one of my favourite things in Sydney, was that we had afternoon tea at the Shangri-La, and we, as Ant said, we get 100 credits towards food, and
credits?
$100, sorry, in credit to use towards. You can use it towards most things at the hotel stay, and they tell you at the beginning this works out to 140 Australian dollars, and we put that towards an afternoon tea, which was very, very nice.
Probably one of the best afternoon teas that I've been to, with the best views, and it was very cheap, so it totaled 176 Australian dollars. We didn't go for the drinks package, so you just get soft drinks and whatever tea you like, or coffee. You don't get any alcohol with that one. I think the alcohol was $20 more per person. But the views were unbelievable. And for us, particularly in the UK when we used to do it, if you go to a reasonably okay hotel or London location, you're probably paying the same for that. So to pay that in the Shangri-La, I thought was great value. And for us, the whole thing was covered by, well, most of it was covered by the credit that we got.
So we stayed 2 nights at the Shangri-La, and we was looking to stay a third night, and due to the whole situation with Brisbane, we had an extra night in Sydney, but we couldn't extend, as Ant said, so we decided to look at other options. We looked at the Intercontinental, which was Sofitel, and then the Four Seasons, and the Four Seasons was literally a road behind.
The one that we should have stayed at because it was so much closer to the, you didn't have to go up the hill.
With all of these hotels that we were looking into, you really can't go wrong. So we looked at the reviews, and there's these minor things and preferences, slight differences in where they're literally located. Like Ant said, the Four Seasons would have been better for us with the luggage, but we ended up picking that just because we've never done Four Seasons before, and we figured actually we might as well for the first time. As soon as you walk in, the ambiance, I would say, between Four Seasons and Shangri-La are completely different. I would say it's a much more serene feel as you go through Four Seasons compared to Shangri-La. Shangri-La seems a lot busier.
There is a big price difference, so I would imagine that controls the amount of people that go there and for how long. So it did feel a lot calm. The notable difference was it was cleaner. The room was not as big, but it was much nicer in its finish and cleanliness, and it's modern.
Yeah, it was. I would say the room was actually a lot nicer. It just wasn't as big, but I loved it in there. It was really nice. We got upgraded again, very similar. We went from a lower floor up to a higher floor. The views of Sydney were amazing. I actually spent the first afternoon just sitting there on the ledge, just looking out very peacefully. But what was a significant difference was their gym. Their gym was looked brand spanking new. The equipment was great, clean. Yeah. I mean, there's no comparison between the Shangri-La and
One of the first things we did, we got onto the ferry. Are they water ferries or are they just ferries?
They're just ferries.
Okay.
There's various terminals in Sydney, and it's great because it's a great way to visit the different locations in Sydney and get these amazing views. And we took the ferry from Circular Quay to Manly, which is something that we wanted to do last time, but didn't get the chance.
One of the great things, especially if you're staying in that area, I think it's less than a 10-minute walk, isn't it, to the ferry terminal. And then I think it's about 20 minutes, give or take, from the ferry terminal where we were to Manly. And I think you pay $1 for this. It's potentially the best value thing that you can do, even if you're just going to get on the ferry to go there and back, just to relax, have a drink, taking the views. Once you get to the other side, for Manly, it's an interesting place where you stop, because to me initially I got British seaside town. It felt like the high streets that you have.
Yeah, and you know what was interesting is because last time we went to Watson's Bay, which I just picked on a complete whim, and was absolutely amazed at how nice Watson's Bay is. But it was interesting because everyone speaks about Manly. So I don't know what I was expecting getting to Manly either.
The impact Watson's Bay has when you arrive is
way more than Manly.
Way more. Yeah. So I was like, why are these people talking about this? But as you progress through this high street, you then get to the beach area, and from the beach you walk around I guess it's the part of the coastline.
Yeah.
And that's where it's super impressive. You get to see, firstly, it's the beachfront, which is beautiful. You have all of the surfers and the people out chilling. And as you walk around, there's sea pools, which seems to be quite common in Sydney. Common. They just create a little pool out of it. It's bizarre. It's hard to describe, really. I think I got a video of it somewhere. And as you're walking around the coastline, it then goes to, I guess this is why it's called a bay, or I would call it a cove, but I think they're covered. You get to the bay, which is kind of like the movie perfect.
Oh, it was really nice. And there was lots of families, friends out, people there. And it was highly recommended to do that walk, which was interesting because in our prior video, we talked about Noosa and going to the Noosa National Park. So for me, it was kind of similar in terms of you're walking that coastal walk. What I would say is it doesn't have anything on Noosa.
No, Noosa's a lot better.
That is amazing. However, that is still incredible in terms of the view.
As part of something that's part of Sydney that you don't have to spend a lot of money, $1 on the ferry to get to, and then you could spend, if you just want to do the walk, which is what we did, you'd probably spend an hour or so.
Yeah.
And if you want to walk out, spend 20 minutes walking to the bay, and then you can relax on the beach. It's busy, but there was definitely plenty of space. It's not like England.
And what I would say is anyone going to visit the area, it's a great spot to go and spend the day. You can go out and hang out on the beach. There's lots of food options there. There's bars, restaurants. So you can really make the most of your time in Manly. And also, I can imagine lots of people would choose to stay in Manly as well.
Definitely, yeah. You would. That same day, we went to a place called Six Head, which is a restaurant overlooking the harbour.
The harbour bridge and the Sydney Opera House, which was right next to the restaurant we went to last year, Luna something, and where I was very disappointed because the cruise ship was blocking my view of the Sydney Opera House. Highly recommended the Six Head restaurant by, I think you saw reviews for it.
I've seen reviews of it. Every person we've met also mentioned go to Six Head. I think work colleagues have told you go to Six Head. I personally wouldn't say it's up there in my top 5 or 10. It's good. I think what you're getting is the views. The location is what really puts it up there. I've definitely had better food than just a regular place in Melbourne.
That is true, but what typically happens is when somewhere is near somewhere very scenic, often the food isn't that amazing.
That's true.
So actually for the setting, you're actually getting very good food, high-end food with amazing scenes around you.
That's a reasonable assessment. It's a reasonable assessment. I'm just saying I don't know that it matches up. I would say in Melbourne, I've had better food everywhere that isn't so highly touted. And maybe that's just the difference between Melbourne and Sydney in general. I don't know. But I wasn't blown away by the food.
No, but the service was great.
The service was excellent.
The weather was really nice. The drinks were really good. And we had a mini celebration of a promotion.
Oh yeah, Selena's promotion. What did they give us? Half a cake? One of my favourite places to eat turned out to be somewhere that Selena had found. It wasn't something that we'd had recommended. I don't even think it had a huge amount of reviews, called Harry's Singapore Crab House.
Like that, yeah.
And this was a place that sold mud crabs, which sounds absolutely disgusting. Even if you like crab, it sounds disgusting. This place turned out to be somewhere that, although it's crab, it felt like a completely different crab meal experience to me.
The whole thing, I mean, first of all, we had the whole restaurant to ourselves, which was a bit odd, but we had great service as a consequence. We wasn't too sure on what to order. They advised us on what to have, the size. I mean, it was huge, the amount of, so often with crabs, sometimes you're working hard and then it's just too much work.
90% work, 10% enjoyment.
Whereas these mud crabs were huge.
Yeah, alongside the mud crab and sauce, we had crab sweet corn soup and also duck. So they are relatively expensive.
And dumplings as well.
And dumplings. Relatively expensive meals on their own. It came out to, I think, around 420 Australian dollars. I normally am not a person that likes to spend.
Cringe at that.
Yeah, I don't like that at all. We've had many conversations here in Vegas. I never feel like I'm getting good value for money when we go to fancy restaurants. I always feel like I'm getting ripped off. Celine has a different perspective because she says it's the ambiance, it's the environment.
Depends where you're going in Vegas. Like sometimes if I go to Red Rock Casino and we pay a lot of money, like to me that's, I don't know why I'm spending a lot of money to go there. Whereas if you're going to Nobu on the Strip, it's like the whole experience.
Feels like a rip off to me. However, this was one of the only places where I felt that I got good value for money. Now I can't remember whether this was that evening because that meal that we had was an afternoon meal or whether it was on a different evening, but we opted to leave the area that we were staying and we needed to get on the public transport system, which at least in all of the cities and places that we've been to in Australia is unbelievably good. Super easy to use and just so cheap. $1 Australian, which is 50 pence. You pay that to get on a tram service and go 15, 20 minutes, half an hour. To me, it's such a good way of using public money, assuming it is public money.
So we went to a place called Darling Harbour where we went to a rodizio, and the rodizio it was good. If you really fancy meat for dinner, that is the place to go. And it was tasty, it was good food, the service was good. I just there was nothing stand out about it over anywhere else that you can go.
Between a Vegas rodizio or when we used to go to Manchester.
Yeah, exactly.
It was the same.
But what was really nice, I think for us, was just getting out of the area that we was in near Circular Quay to go to a different place where the hustle and bustle was very different. And this reminded me a lot more of central London. So in central London, you get on a tube, you go to these different areas. You've obviously got the fancier like Kensington parts, Oxford Street through to Chinatown. And this is where we got to see Sydney a little bit more in that context of seeing the different areas, and they have their Chinatown, they have their more business district area. And then on the last night in Sydney, we went to a place called Spice Alley, which we would have not have known about had somebody told us about it last year.
Was it on our video?
Last year, no, somebody in Sydney told us to go.
Okay.
But
oh yeah, I do remember,
So we wouldn't have known to go but for this person, and we just didn't get the chance to go last time. So super easy. We got on the tram there, and then you walk about 10 minutes. And you're just walking down this very busy street, and then you take this left, and then you're in Spice Alley. And the only way to describe it is, if you've ever seen videos of Singapore and the places where they have their street market, street food, it looks very much like that. So lots of these food stalls, vendors set up with very casual dining tables on a first come, first serve basis, with everything from Malaysian food to, I don't know, Japanese food was along that strip.
I think it had most Asian foods there.
Just in this one strip. Very busy. So I think we was there on a Thursday or no, I don't even know. Maybe it was a Friday night. Really, I mean, really eclectic. And what stood out for us was just how different the vibe there was in terms of the music, the scenery, the people demographic. Lots more students in that area compared to where we were staying by Circular Quay.
Yeah, Circular Quay definitely appears to be the rich area. The first shop we came to was selling $30,000, $40,000 watches versus Spice Alley, which seemed like a bunch of students just out to have a good time. So my overall feeling on food in Sydney is it's good. That's probably about as far as I would go. If I had to compare it to Las Vegas, I would say very, very, very similar in terms of the quality, the ideas, the options. I wouldn't say it's above Vegas, unlike Melbourne, which I'm going to walk back a little bit because in last year's video, I think I said Vegas is a lot better, but I think just if you throw a dart at a board with a restaurant in Melbourne, the likelihood of it being great is very, very high. I'm not sure that's the same here, and definitely not in Sydney.
So yeah, with Vegas, we have a lot of options, but Melbourne is just far better in terms of knowing that you're going to get good quality and the food is going to be genuinely good. Whereas I wouldn't say that you could just pick anywhere in Vegas.
The options are very similar, and I would still say that Vegas has more options. It's more that if you were to pick 50 restaurants to go over the next 50 days, the likelihood of them being better and up to the standard that you want in Melbourne is higher than here. I think there are a lot of misses here. And then when you add in the cost of food in Vegas, it's not worth it. Whereas the days that Selena was in Canberra, I would just get on a tram from the place, head into the CBD area of Melbourne and pick a random spot. I'm like, this is the best food.
I'm slightly different to Anne. I think the food is genuinely good. It's just not on par with Melbourne, and there are good food options. There's just nothing that wow about it in general. But we did find, and we forgot about this random Chinese restaurant, which is a bit of a dive in Ryde, which was really, really good and really cheap. And completely random one day. It was this road that we drove to in the rain. I'm like, oh, we'll just go here. And the reason I point that out is because I bet there are lots of hidden gems in Sydney that whereas we were just looking on Google for places. So I would just say the food is good in Sydney. It's not as good as Melbourne.
That is how I started. I said the food is good. Before we get onto coffee, because Australian coffee are one. It isn't really a hidden gem, it's a very well-known, very popular place, so I'm told. Celine said we have to go to this, I'm sure your colleagues said.
And we were right next door to it as well.
Is Sammy's bar. We're not particularly big drinkers. How good can it be? It's just a bar. However, this place was that good. I would say even if you're not a drinker,
go.
You need to go. The greeters, the people that welcome you in, very good. Our bar staff, or the guy that dealt with us, just exactly what you want. Entertaining, fun, engaging, described the things, kind of took what you had said about certain drinks as, oh, you might like this. And best of all for me, and I think us, is they did what would be 1/3 or half portion drinks. So we were paying
mini cocktails basically.
£4
or something.
Yeah, I think it was $4 around that for these cocktails, and it allowed us to get through 4 of them because it equated to 1.5 drinks. We can't drink that much, so it was perfect. And whenever you were thinking or you're getting close to the end drink, he was already there ready to explain to you the next drink.
And it's a pretty cool theme that they have. So it's based on Sammy's hotel, and when you go in, they'll ask you, do you want to sit somewhere else in the room or do you want to sit at the bar? And they do recommend for your first time sit at the bar because you can get that engagement with the barman. And then they have a fold-out menu, which is a Monopoly board.
Yeah, Monopoly style
board with the different types of service that you get across a hotel. So when you check in, room service, concierge, and then these different cocktails, and then people will have these dice that they can roll. And
so if you're not sure of what drink you want,
roll the dice.
Just play the game, and then they'll serve that to you. So that was for me, a really fun and cheap. I don't know how many drinks we got through of the small one, probably between 7 and 8 for the pair of us.
I'm not entirely sure. Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, and probably spent, I honestly don't know, I want to say $40.
It really wasn't a lot for the entertainment,
Yeah.
the quality of the drink. Yeah, it was really good.
Definitely a spot. If you're anywhere local to that, whether you're at the Rocks or where the ferries come in, it's worth the 10-minute walk just to go in there, particularly if it's within there. I think theirs is literally a happy hour.
Because we were going to the Rodizio that evening and I felt very tempted to stay
Yeah.
and even come back later. So it's definitely worth going.
Very fun.
This video wouldn't be complete without us discussing coffee in Sydney. What to say about coffee in Sydney? Well, what I would say is it was good. What we've learned, in Australia, you're not going to get a bad coffee, whether it's cappuccino, lattes, piccolos, they're all very good. For me, the coffee, whilst good, nowhere hits on the quality of coffee in Melbourne. Melbourne just wins. When it comes to food and coffee, it is just up here, whereas everywhere else is very good, just not quite where Melbourne is, in my opinion.
I would agree. So you use my thing for coffee, that it's okay, it's good. But it's not to say, there's not really much else to say. It's the standard is high, it's good, but when you've been to somewhere else, it doesn't have that edge. So similar to you, the worst coffee in Melbourne is probably an 8 for a coffee in Sydney.
Yeah.
And then the best coffee in Melbourne is not the same product as the best coffee in Sydney. It's so much different. And again, it didn't matter which place we went to in Melbourne, it was great. Whereas here you did have to be selective. And some places, fair enough compared to the US, it's very good coffee. But when you've just come from somewhere that has great coffee, you're like, it's okay. I don't really want to pay.
The best coffee was actually at the Four Seasons.
Yeah, the one other place that I had good coffee, and I can't remember if you had it as well, is in that business centre.
Ryde, yeah.
North Ryde had a good coffee place, and I would say that's right up there. But again, I would say that was a 9 in Sydney and maybe a 6.5 for Melbourne coffee. So anyone that's going to tell us that Sydney coffee is better, it is not, and you have not left Sydney. So what are our general thoughts and feelings around Sydney, now having spent a lot more time versus the one day of last year? For me, it's the top 2 cities in the world. So for me, the top 2 are Melbourne and Sydney. I don't know how I would place them. I'd have to spend a little bit more time there, but the food is great. Even though we're saying it's not quite as good as Melbourne, it's very good. The coffee is very good. The people, at least the people that I interact with, great people, great perspective on life. Everybody that I spoke to, I had a good conversation with. They feel very close to us as English people. The weather is very nice there. I think we had one day that wasn't great, but otherwise, really, really good weather. The scenery, some of the best in the world. Yeah, it's hard to fault.
There's a charm with Sydney. I think it's such a unique place in terms of what Ant said, the trees, the greenery, then you've got the water, the beaches, the rolling hills, and then you've got such a good mix of things going on. Then added to that, the weather. We like that type of climate. I know some people like drier climates. I think for us now living in Vegas, whilst it's practical when it's hot, dry heat, we do love a bit more humidity. For me, I agree with Anne. We spent one night there last year. This has just confirmed that I do really love Sydney. The other notable thing to mention about Sydney that we didn't do on this trip, and we somewhat mentioned about Brisbane in the last video. So with Brisbane, we spoke about kind of that area, the CBD area, but what was great about Brisbane was all the other places you could go to, whether it was on the Gold Coast or the Sunshine Coast, the day trips, and there was so much to explore. Sydney has that as well. And there were lots of places that we were considering going, doing a day trip with the car that we didn't do. So we haven't even touched on that. And when I've spoken to other people about how they spend their weekends in Sydney, it sounds amazing that they might go to a winery, which I know you can do in Melbourne as well. They might go to a different coastline, a different beach. They'll go to a national park. So there was similarities between what I heard for Brisbane. But this is where I realised with Australia, that seems to be the case in most most of these places.
Yeah, I think that's probably why there's only really 5 or 6 livable areas in Australia, and each one of them is kind of similar in terms of what it offers. It's just what your preference or flavour is.
And I think what I'm learning is you just pick the place that you like the most and has the charm that you're looking for.
Yeah. So let us know what you thought about this video and tell us if we've missed anything that we should have visited in Sydney. We will probably be going back next year. If not, we'll definitely be going back in the near future. So if there's a place that you really love in or around Sydney that you know we should visit, let us know down below. Thanks for watching.